Outside a residential building, a worker is actively working near a lower wall, unaware that the massive concrete awning above is about to unexpectedly shift downward. Concrete overhangs and architectural projections can become unstable long before visible movement appears. Navigating a renovation site, a worker steps on a loose floor panel, unaware that the unanchored wood will unexpectedly give way. Temporary floor covers only provide safe support when they are firmly secured, properly rated, and unable to shift under movement. A loose panel over open joists can behave like a hidden pivot point, especially when weight reaches an unsupported edge. Once the panel tips or slides, the walking surface changes instantly from stable flooring to an exposed opening, with very little time to regain secure footing. Site managers must firmly secure temporary flooring covers to joists using industrial fasteners. In a busy cafe, a barista reaches over an espresso machine to squeeze a container onto a crowded shelf, unaware that a slight shift will send the elevated containers sliding from the storage area. Elevated storage becomes unstable when shelves are packed so tightly that one small adjustment changes the balance of everything around it. Adding pressure to a crowded shelf can push nearby containers past their support point, allowing gravity to pull them away from the surface. Overhead, items must always have enough spacing, weight control, and stable placement to prevent sudden sliding from above. Staff should regularly reorganize crowded shelves to maintain proper balance before placing additional items overhead. At a roof construction site, a builder balances on a tall ladder, completely unaware that a heavy metal frame will shift unexpectedly and contact the ladder's base. A ladder depends entirely on a stable base, clear surroundings, and protection from outside movement. When unsecured steel framing shifts near the ladder's footing, even a small contact force can remove the support holding the ladder in place. Elevated work should never rely on a ladder position near loose, heavy materials, because one unexpected push can quickly turn stable access into uncontrolled movement. Outside an auto repair shop, a man relaxes on the back of a parked truck, unaware that a fast-moving car is about to enter the roadside area. Resting along the outer edge of a parked vehicle near active traffic leaves almost no protection from sudden roadside movement. A moving vehicle carries momentum that can instantly disrupt the parked truck and the surrounding space. Safe rest areas must be placed away from traffic flow because vehicle edges, bumpers, and tailgates are not reliable barriers against fast-changing roadway hazards. Workers must establish clear safety boundaries that keep personnel away from active roadways. At a roadside zone, men unload gas cylinders from a flatbed truck. Completely unaware, a rapidly approaching dump truck is quickly entering the active loading area. Roadside loading becomes highly unstable when heavy materials are handled without solid separation from moving traffic. If a large vehicle leaves its intended path, the force enters the work area faster than people, equipment, or cargo can be repositioned. Temporary loading zones must be physically protected because warning awareness alone cannot stop sudden vehicle movement from disrupting the entire operation. Always position loading operations away from the direct flow of moving traffic. At this depot, a worker casually throws a heavy crate of sensitive packaged materials to the ground, unaware that the sudden impact is about to trigger something unexpected. Sensitive cargo must be handled according to the reaction risk inside the package, not just the weight of the box. A sudden drop can transfer impact force through the contents and trigger a rapid pressure or material response across the unloading area. Soft handling, controlled placement, and clear package identification are essential whenever. Materials may react unpredictably under force. Treat every sensitive package as fragile during offloading procedures. Enforce soft handling protocols for all shipments to reduce the chance of sudden reactions inside active transport zones. Inside a busy factory, a massive load is being carefully lifted when a speeding forklift pushes against the suspended weight. Hoisting operations require a fully controlled space because suspended loads are already carrying stored overhead risk. When a moving forklift contacts the lifted weight, the added force can disrupt the balance of the entire lifting system. That instability travels through the boom, rigging, and support structure, allowing gravity to quickly redirect the load and create a wide overhead movement area. Isolate active hoisting areas with rigid barricades to block vehicle traffic completely. Assign ground spotters to guide equipment operators safely away from overhead lifting operations. At a busy roadside utility pole, a technician climbs the structure, unaware that an electrical discharge is about to disrupt stable positioning. Electrical work at height requires both energy isolation and stable positioning controls because one failure can immediately affect the other. When clearance near energized lines is too small, electrical energy can transfer through the surrounding system without direct contact. That sudden discharge can interrupt controlled movement near the pole, so isolation, insulated protection, and verified clearance must be in place before climbing begins. Always isolate and verify elevated power systems before beginning aerial work. Secure insulated fall protection systems to maintain stable positioning during tasks performed at height. At this active construction site, workers guide a concrete pump truck hose across the upper decking, but the temporary supports below are quietly bending. Wet concrete is not a static load. It shifts, settles, and builds pressure across every part of the temporary support system. If shoring is underdesigned or poorly reinforced, the weight can gradually overwhelm the framework before the surface shows obvious warning signs. Pouring operations must be treated as dynamic structural events, with support strength verified for maximum load, movement, and pressure. Absolute stability requires detailed verification before pouring operations begin. Every temporary support system must be designed to handle shifting fluid weight rather than only static loads. Thorough structural inspections help ensure the framework remains stable under maximum pressure. At this residential extraction site, an operator uses a skid steer loader to push a severed pine tree into a planned drop zone, but the timber twists away from the intended direction. A cut tree holds stored tension that can change direction when outside force is applied. Pushing the trunk with machinery may distort the hinge, overload the fibers, and redirect the release path away from the intended drop direction. Directional control should come from proper cutting technique, clear planning, and isolation of the work area, rather than mechanical force applied to unstable timber. True directional control relies on precise cutting methods rather than pushing force. Also, maintaining a safe distance remains one of the strongest forms of protection. On a dark city street, sanitation workers load a dumpster into the back of a garbage truck. Suddenly, bright headlights appear behind them, quickly approaching the active roadside operation. Roadside collection work becomes especially vulnerable when darkness, traffic speed, and stationary equipment overlap in the same space. Warning lights and reflective gear improve visibility, but they do not physically stop an approaching vehicle from entering the operation. Night work needs advanced traffic control, protected approach lanes, and solid separation, so the collection area remains isolated from fast-moving roadway momentum. Night operations require strong physical separation rather than relying only on visibility. Deploying traffic barriers and advanced diversion systems far ahead of the work area greatly improves roadside protection. At this bustling workshop, a worker adjusts a heavy truck tire filling with air. But the expanding rubber unexpectedly loses structural integrity. Compressed air creates stored energy inside any tire, tank, or enclosed rubber structure. If the material is weakened, damaged, or pushed beyond its pressure limit, the internal force can release outward faster than nearby movement can be controlled. Inflation tasks must use containment cages, pressure limits, and distance controls because compressed systems can change from routine equipment to force release hazards instantly. Proper protection requires treating compressed pressure systems with extreme caution. Using reinforced containment cages during tire inflation helps create a secure barrier against unexpected structural separation. Physical shielding remains one of the most reliable safety controls. Deep underground, a worker pushes a heavy minecart toward the extraction shaft, unaware that the access platform is missing below. Underground access points must never depend on habit or assumed routine. In low light, a missing platform can remove the expected walking surface without an obvious visual warning. Before movement continues near shafts, gates, or transfer points, the floor condition must be verified because gravity takes over immediately once stable support is no longer present. Safe underground movement depends on verifying environmental conditions before every step. Automated safety gates should physically block exposed underground openings until stable flooring is fully secured in place. In this transport yard, a worker stands beside a loaded flatbed truck, unaware of the shifting balance. Suddenly, a massive payload shifts free from the trailer. A loaded trailer can appear stable, while the cargo has already shifted internally toward the edge. Once the restraint is missing or the load begins to separate, gravity immediately takes control and redirects the weight into the surrounding loading area. Visual balance is never enough during transport operations. Every heavy shipment must be restrained and approached only from outside the potential movement path. Safe loading operations require maintaining strict separation from active cargo zones. Establishing rigid exclusion boundaries around loading areas greatly reduces exposure to sudden load movement. In this busy shipping yard, a driver waits inside his parked vehicle. But from the blind spot high above, a massive steel container unexpectedly shifts from the lifting path. Suspended containers carry overhead risk across every space below the lifting path. If rigging control weakens or the container shifts unexpectedly, the full load can move downward faster than the area can be cleared. Vehicles, cabins, and nearby structures should never be treated as protection beneath industrial lifting operations, because true control comes from keeping the entire load path empty. Protection beneath active lifting operations requires complete overhead separation. On this active factory floor, a worker enters the adjustment area of a heavy hydraulic press to clear a jammed board, but the massive steel canopy above still carries active mechanical pressure. A hydraulic press remains hazardous whenever stored energy or automated motion is still active inside the system. Entering the adjustment area without full isolation allows the machine to continue its cycle while the operating space is occupied. Press maintenance must begin with lockout, verified zero energy, and interlocked guarding to prevent mechanical movement during clearing or adjustment tasks. Safe maintenance requires complete energy isolation before entering active machinery areas. Physical lockout systems remain critical for controlling unexpected motion. Along this canal bank, a fisherman raises his long rod toward the water, but inches above, an energized overhead cable hangs silently across the open air. Overhead cables must be treated as active energy sources even when they appear still and silent. Long rods, poles, and conductive tools can reduce clearance enough for electrical energy to transfer through the air or the material. Safe work near overhead utilities depends on distance first, because once the energy path forms, control of the surrounding movement can change instantly. Strong electrical safety depends on maintaining wide clearance around overhead infrastructure. Environmental awareness should always come before raising long equipment near utility lines. Suspended wires must always be treated as active energy sources. In a quiet yard, a worker unlatches the back doors of a truck. But behind the metal doors, a large stack of unstable goods has shifted heavily during transport. Cargo inside a truck can shift heavily during transport and press against the rear doors long before unloading begins. When the latch is released, the door may be the only barrier holding the unstable stack in place. Trailer doors should always be opened from a protected side position, with cargo restraints verified before the load is allowed to move into the unloading area. Preventing load movement begins with properly securing cargo before transport begins. Every shipment requires reliable restraints to reduce shifting during travel. In this snowy courtyard, a worker stands high on a leaning stepladder to reach the roof. But the frozen ground beneath the metal feet offers very little grip. A ladder on icy ground loses the friction needed to hold its base steady under climbing pressure. As the weight rises higher, the center of gravity shifts and pushes more force into the ladder feet. Without dry contact, anchoring, or anti-slip support, the base can slide away and remove the stable access point needed for elevated work. Safe winter access requires securing a stable footing before climbing begins. Every ladder setup depends on dry, level surface contact to maintain proper support. In this loading yard, a worker leans through the truck's side rail opening, but the heavy hinged metal unexpectedly swings downward without support. Hinged metal barriers can move with heavy force when they are unlatched, unsupported, or left under gravity's control. Reaching through the opening places the surrounding space directly inside the swing path of the steel. Before any loading task continues, folding rails and side gates must be locked, supported, or fully controlled so the moving framework cannot close unexpectedly. Maintaining full separation from moving frameworks remains one of the safest approaches during loading operations. Reaching through unsecured barriers increases exposure to unexpected mechanical movement. Hinged structures should always be firmly secured before anyone approaches. At this street loading zone, a rider balances a heavy motorcycle on a box truck ramp, but an unexpected remote command suddenly lowers the platform beneath the wheels. Hydraulic lift gates change elevation quickly, and that movement can remove stable support from anything positioned on the platform. When a remote command starts without clear coordination, the load, wheels, and platform no longer move as one controlled system. Lift operation must always require visual confirmation, communication, and stable positioning before any upward or downward motion begins. Clear communication is essential during automated loading operations. Activating lift platforms requires full visual confirmation from everyone directly involved. Stable positioning should always be verified before beginning any descent. Outside this quiet diner, an unmanned three-wheeled machine begins rolling backward down an incline. Within seconds, the uncontrolled equipment reaches the storefront. Unsecured equipment on a slope can begin moving as soon as gravity overcomes friction and brake resistance. Once momentum builds, even a small machine can travel far enough to damage structures and scatter materials across public space. Parking on any incline requires mechanical locks, wheel restraints, and protective barriers, so unmanned equipment cannot roll into occupied or fragile areas. Safe parking procedures require reliable mechanical locks to prevent unintended movement. In this dusty yard, a worker steps into the front travel path of a massive concrete mixer, but the elevated cab completely blocks the operator's forward view. Large industrial vehicles often have blind areas that hide movement directly in front of the cab. If the vehicle starts forward without confirmed visibility, the available clearance in the travel path can disappear almost immediately. Safe vehicle movement depends on separated routes, clear operator communication, and strict control of the front path before the machine begins to move. Safe transport environments require strict separation between pedestrian routes and active machinery paths. Ground personnel should maintain clear visual communication with operators before crossing any vehicle route. Continuous spatial awareness greatly reduces vehicle path exposure. At this busy warehouse yard, a forklift strains to lift a massive metal cylinder structure, but nearby, an unaware worker stands close to the shifting balance point. Extreme lifting pushes forklifts and similar machines close to their stability limits, especially when the load is oversized or raised away from the center line. Once the weight moves beyond the balance point, the equipment can pivot and redirect the load across the surrounding area. Heavy lifts need firm exclusion boundaries, rated equipment, and continuous control of the load's center of gravity. Safe lifting operations require rigid exclusion zones around all suspended loads. Maintaining strong physical distance remains one of the most effective protections against unexpected equipment instability. In this machinery workshop, a worker watches a massive diesel generator suspended by an overhead crane, but high above, the steel rigging is slowly reaching its load limit. Overhead, crane lifts rely on every cable, hook, shackle, and connection holding under full tension. If the rigging reaches its limit or a component weakens, load control can vanish instantly and gravity takes over the suspended weight. Before lifting begins, the entire rigging system must be inspected, rated, and isolated from surrounding activity, so any movement stays within a controlled area. Safe heavy lifting depends on thorough structural inspection before every operation. Establishing a fully protected exclusion area helps ensure unexpected load movement occurs away from occupied spaces. On this highway, a motor grader pushes a stalled road roller up a trailer ramp, but forcing dead weight upward begins shifting the machine away from the center of balance. Pushing heavy equipment up a narrow ramp removes much of the steering control needed to keep the load centered. Uneven force from the pushing machine can drive the stalled equipment sideways, especially once the wheels or drums drift away from the ramp's center line. Loading heavy machinery requires controlled pulling, fixed alignment, and restraint systems rather than uncontrolled pushing force. Safe loading procedures avoid blindly pushing heavy machinery onto elevated platforms. Controlled towing systems with secured alignment points provide better directional stability during transport. To keep learning from these important workplace safety lessons, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Stay aware, stay safe.